welcome back to another episode of the Higher Level Podcast. So joining James Dillon and myself tonight on the show, we have Clarke. Chris, thanks very much for coming on the show.
Thanks very much for having me.
No, I appreciate the time, mate. I always like to speak to people like yourself who are involved in putting shows on regionally in the UK. Obviously, you've just come off the back of Budo 51 there. So just overall, how was the stress levels last week leading up to the show? What's the week like ahead? Because obviously we know it's difficult with pull-outs and shows and stuff like that. Just walk us through how stressful it is.
You'd think after 12 years now that I'd be mentally prepared for everything that is going to unfold, but it really, really isn't. Even Saturday, right up until about 7:30 in the evening. Now, bear in mind the show started 2 hours previously, waiting for like fighters that got stuck in traffic and having to slow the show down and so on and so forth. There's just constant stress throughout. I only really feel content with the job when it's sort of like when it gets to the end of the penultimate fight.
Is there ever a point in that lead up you think to yourself, "What the fuck do I do this to myself?"
Exactly. Is it really worth it? And honest to God, I think this last show was probably the most stressful. I ended up with 10 fights, but 10 good fights. Mm-hmm. And the show was packed out. It was a great atmosphere. There was some great fights. The footage is on its way. But honest to God, I think if I didn't have like my missus to scream at, I don't think I'd have got through it. Honest to God, it was. I don't know if some of the people might have seen my Facebook posts where it was just when I've said it's so painful at the minute because the game has changed a lot post COVID. The majority of it is for the better, but I don't think we were prepared for such an immediate change. I think if things that have developed gradually, it'd have been a lot easier sell. I mean, obviously, James knows with like he's put on his posts this evening, he's been struggling to match Dylan and Mark, and it's just hard at the moment.
Yeah, what is the most difficult thing putting on a show? Is it the matchmaking, or is it all the rules and regulations? What is the thing that gives you the biggest headache?
In recent memory, so probably since post-COVID, it's actually guys. Initially, one of my pet peeves is I put it on Facebook a few weeks ago. I don't understand how some coaches run successful gyms because they don't reply. I always had a laugh, and I always used to tag James in the post when it was that stupid meme come around on Facebook saying if you had to ring somebody and if they answered they died, I'd always ring James Doolan because he'll always text back but he'll never answer the phone. But there are just some people that don't text back or message back, and you just think, how are your fighters actually competing? How are they paying their gym memberships if you're not getting them fights? Maybe it's just me. Maybe they don't even like the show. I don't know, but just say that. But I think it's just getting guys to actually take the difficult fights now. So when I touched on it a few moments ago with such an immediate change, things like only cans, I actually think that was good for the sport because it outed a lot of horse shittery, whatever you want to call it. But there was some genuine journeymen and stuff that did shows justice. And people wanted those kind of fights. They could take certain fights for experience, but now guys don't want to fight. It's basically the best have to fight the best. It's how it used to be. And James will tell you 10, 15 years ago, you basically had no alternative but to fight who was in front of you. Yeah. It's just about, I think, finding that median and eventually going back to the way it was.
It's sometimes, I mean, James, we've spoken about this. You've spoken about it in the show. Sometimes it's not the fight you want for a fighter, but it's a necessary evil to save a fighter doing all that training and then having nobody or nothing to compete against at the end of it.
You need it because otherwise they're not going to get to fight. There is, if you look at journeymen in boxing, they're there to serve a purpose. They're there to help develop young fighters as they come through and stuff. I was at a boxing show at the weekend there to watch Kieran Smith box, and you could tell straight away like the red corner fighters were pretty much going to win, but none of the journeymen get stopped. They all went the 6 or the 8 rounds. So the the developing fighter was getting these 6 of these 8 rounds, he was getting problems to solve and stuff like that. And that's the way the business works. There is a flip side to that with MMA, where there's some guys, I don't know if they're mentally ill or something, but they're turning up and just taking a kicking. And there is some of the guys about, but there is also just a bunch of guys just looking for easy fights. I don't know if they're just trying to pad their records to get to a level where they can maybe go to like a big promotion and stuff like that. But these guys generally tend to get found out. Like they'll get to the UFC or a Bellator or a PFL or whatever with a padded record, and they look completely out of their depth. And it's a weird, very, very weird mindset where you as a coach, if you're turning down difficult fights, you must have insecurities and stuff about your fighters. We can use Mark Ewan as an example. He's only had 3 pro fights, but he had a massive run at amateur with hard fights. He beat guys like Teddy Stringer and stuff. He's turned pro and he fought the next best lightweight prospect in Scotland at the time was Michael Blair. He's took a massive fight with Tom Mullen, who nobody wants to fight. Tom's still struggling to get fights. And then he's had to go to Africa for his third fight, do you know what I mean? So it's a hard thing. We pretty much, we ran about 35 shows back in the day. We had Sport Fight, we had the Absolute Combat shows, and we had the Hostile Territory shows were all ours. And it was the matchmaking that made us stop it, because we were having to, we started these shows to get fights for our guys. And we eventually stopped because we were having to bring in internationals for every fight. So we were having to bring in French and Swedish and Irish and whatever, Spanish, Dutch, whatever, and then fire them up in hotels, pay their flights, pay them. We paid everybody right from the start. And eventually it just got so stressful trying to match these fights that we were done with the promotion side of things.
Yeah. Chris, you're nodding away there. That sounds like it's ringing some bells.
He's hit the nail on the head, and it just does get to the point where, like I say, not even necessarily, it doesn't even have to be fight week. It can be 2-3 weeks in advance, because some people have done 8-9 weeks camps, and they've trained for a specific fighter, and then all of a sudden the only guy you can throw at them is a guy who can wrestle ridiculously well, and they go, oh well, and then it's like, well, at this point now, what do you want me to do? So you're either looking abroad, paying £300-400 in flights, hotel, sticking £300-400 purse on top, or alternatively, you're turning around looking for, as James said, they don't get stopped. You're looking for the best guy to come in and basically just go after it. I mean, I've been, I won't use the term guilty, but I have been guilty of using journeyman in the past. But guys like Sean Lomas, guys that want to come and fight, are difficult to get out of there and ultimately don't want to come and lose. And you find yourself then having conversations with them beforehand where it's you sort of almost saying to them, like, it's not even about, like, it's difficult because some people just want you to turn up, like James said, and I don't know if there's something wrong with them, and they just like, oh, just last as long as you can or slow it down. And I've heard these conversations. I commentate ANC shows, and it's just like, and I'm like, mate, listen, I don't care how much I've got to pay you. I don't want anybody falling over. I just want you to go and try and ping his head off, even if it's one of my guys that he's had to stand in. I'm like, listen, just go out and give him hell. It is stressful, and I understand, like when James said he's done 30 odd shows, and in the end, it's just easier to call it a day. I mean, I'd love to think. I think COVID was good for me because I got like nearly a 2-year break.
Yeah.
But even now, after doing 7-8 shows since I come back, I sort of think, I wonder if I just have 6 months off.
I know it's one of them, but I understand obviously how stressful it is at you, but guys like you and your promotion, Chris, they're necessary for MMA in the UK, and is that a dilemma for you as well? Because you know how important your show is for the amateurs coming through, for the guys that have just turned professional. It's shows like yours that push those guys on to.
Yeah, I mean, I don't live under a rock. Like, I mean, my show is, I mean, it's very easily described in any of my social media pages, and it literally just says building grassroots MMA one event at a time. I've got a show. So I've got a sports centre in one area of the country, a sports centre in another country, Wales, and a town hall in Scotland. I'm not seeking big venues. I'm not looking to pour 50 grand into an event to make it seem like who's play up against each other, other promotions about who's got the biggest dick or anything like that. All I want to do is provide a platform that is safe, runs smoothly, runs well, and ultimately, if you just want to have one fight and move on, crack on, because there'll be the next guy behind you. But as long as everybody comes and ultimately enjoys the experience, I was having that conversation this weekend with Chris Fields about there are a few coaches like James, Chris, Matt Inman, and that's probably the best bit when you see these guys stood backstage and the coaches basically just say, "You've done the work now, just go and have fun." Yeah. They're the best kind of fights for me, and the best shows where people just want to come and do it, and you know this is going to be good.
And obviously, James, you've been part of many shows. You spoke highly Budo in the past. You've always got guys going on the show, whether up here, down south. So, it's important we have people like Chris Clarke in the sport in the UK.
Definitely, we've had guys on the show for as long as I can remember. We've had some excellent fights on the show. We've had some really good guys who've been on to big shows, like Callum was a champion there, went on to Bellator and fought in Brave and stuff. Lee Johnson had a good run there at the tournament, won good fights, and the show's important for us, man, because there's not a lot happening up in Scotland, and Budo's been pretty consistent, so it gets our guys up here. We've been on the Bolton show a bunch and stuff as well, and it's just another outlet. And there's stuff I can go to Chris with that I can't go to other promoters. Like, I need this guy matched, these guys matched. Do you know what I mean? Like, I can be honest with him and say, look, he's maybe not going to sell you a lot of tickets for this one, but he can get the next one, or you'd be doing me a favour. Like with Mark and Dylan about to fight in Scotland, that is technically that's a favour for me. Like, they don't need to put their fights on for us. They'll probably sell it Grangemouth with foot Mark and Dylan. But it's like it's something these guys need. Mark and Dylan need fights, and Chris and Budo putting the guys on is something we won't forget. Do you know what I mean? If he phones me and I can give him somebody last minute or whatever, or he needs main event guys or whatever in the future, I'll make sure I repay it.
And it does sound like a mutually beneficial relationship as such. Like, and for Chris, for you as well, how important is it having a good relationship with coaches around the UK, coaches like James? Obviously, you mentioned Chris Fields as well.
Yeah, and it's something that we discussed at length, actually, with Chris at the weekend after the show, because, like James said, then he can say things to me or approach me with things that he necessarily can't say to other people, and I'm the same. I don't shy away from anything. Maybe that's one of my faults. Where if I'm going to say something, I'm just going to say it. It might not sound great, but it needs to be said. And I think there needs to be more transparency and more honesty, because it's difficult. I've worked shows in the past. I'll take AFC, for example, Ray Thompson's show. James has put a lot of guys on that over the years as well. And it's like, I remember he doing his first show at the Leeds Town Hall. And the show, the venue looked amazing. The show was fantastic for the most part. And at the end of the show, you had all these guys that turned around and they were going, "Oh, it was the best thing ever. It was this and it was that. And it was great, 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 great." And I just turned around and I said, "Right, do you want my honest opinion?" And I told him exactly what was great and exactly what was shite. And he basically, and now that's another show that's obviously gone on and done fantastic things for grassroots MMA. SCC the same. A lot of people think me and Adam should be almost at war because we're both promoting the same town. Bolton's one of the biggest towns in England, but it's still only 6 miles wide. And people think like, "Oh, it's mental. I don't understand why you're helping him." And I'm like, well, he helps me and I help him. And it needs more of that from both from a promoter and a coach point of view. And it's something that for the most part is severely lacking.
Do you think that if that can be worked on at the grassroots side of MMA, I know it's going to be very difficult, but is it positive relationships and good relationships like that can push the sport on further?
Yeah, I do. I mean, it's like I put on Facebook today about events for next year. That wasn't necessarily me looking to book my own show, but at some point I'm going to look to book events. And I basically just asked promoters, tagged them all in it, and just said, if you've got any dates booked in, can you let me know? And I think one of the comments was something like what's this? Fucking promoters working together. What's all this about? As if to say, like, well, I don't know if it's a family show, but basically I said I haven't got time to be a cunt all the time. So I'd sooner find out when everybody around my area is promoting shows and try and not clash, or if I'm going to put fighters, I'd rather know who's going to be where, and make it mutually beneficial for the shows to get the fighter on so they make the most money, the shows make more money, to keep putting the fighters on, and it's just one massive system and all the cogs need to fit.
I think you might be speaking too much common sense here though, mate.
Well, at some point it's got to click. What that is, whether it's just whether we outlaw journeymen and do away with that, or everybody conforms to a certain set of rules, or whether it's the EA MMA or whatever it's called, whatever. But I don't think everybody's going to agree with everything, but there needs to be medians, or at least a set of ground rules that people need to sort of abide by.
Well, it's still a young sport. There's plenty of time. There's plenty of time. Time is on everybody's side, I would say. And we touched on a wee bit about matchmaking. We mentioned Dylan and Mark there. So obviously Dylan and Mark are going to be in the Grangemouth show in November. How happy are you, James, that both guys have got a fight? Because we spoke about the difficulty getting them matched in the past, and Dylan, you've said yourself, it's been really difficult to get him fights. So how happy are you that the guys have got something to look to and got something to be working towards?
I'm happy. It's important that the guys get matched. We've obviously struggled getting them matched. We've had issues with some of the bigger promotions are trying to tie them into long-term deals for poor money and stuff. We're also at a point where at the last PFL, when I was there with Stevie in New York, we were speaking to the matchmakers there, and they actually brought up Mark and Dylan to us. So they've obviously been looking at them for the European series, but their main fights, you know what I mean? Dylan's had a 4-minute fight after a 4-year break. He needs more cage time. He needs to be out there, and Mark's only 3-0 because of COVID, and again, just the names they get, some of these guys that have turned them down. Every time there's a promotion posting saying I need a lightweight, I need a featherweight, I'll message straight away, and they'll not even get back to me. They'll just say they won't take Nook or Ewan. And I'm like, fuck it. Do you know what I mean? But they need out. They can't be on the shelf. Dylan needs back out to get more submersed in our system. He's been here for 2 years now. We've fixed some of the technical things I thought he had wrong. He needs a wee run out just to get his groove again after being in big fights really early in his career. And Mark's obviously been one of our more active guys with big amateur run and then turning pro, but he's not going to get to these bigger stages with sub-5 fights. You know what I mean? He's needing to get to 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 fights or whatever, and then he can end up getting to the level that he's going to end up at. But if nobody's want to duck him, if nobody's want to fight him, it's very hard, and there's no point in him fighting absolute bumps. I don't want him to go to the UFC with 10 first-round stoppages, because he's capable of that. I want him to be in trouble. I want him to lose a round. I want him to face as many different styles as possible. I want him to have to deal with adversity, different styles, specialists, whatever, fluctuate between weight classes or whatever. So when he eventually gets to the UFC or PFL, whatever, he's ready for whatever they throw at him. And there's too many guys try to handpick fights and then get to these big shows, and they're only thinking about that, getting to that show, and it's like the first contract. I want him in the UFC for 25-year-old, and I want him to be there till he's 32, 33, and then he walks away when he's done. Do you know what I mean? I want him to still grow as a fighter, because he's still a young man and he's still learning, and I need to test along the way, which is why we took like the Tom Mullen fight, because Tom's one of the best prospects in the country. He's probably going to end up in the UFC as well. He's fucking taller than Mark. He's an excellent fighter for a very good gym, and these guys ducking and hand picking fights and stuff eventually get found out. Whereas the long-term plan for the type of guys is the same with Dylan, is get to these promotions and stay there and make as much money as they can, secure their kind of future financially, and get out in with their kind of faculties intact.
It's sort of the story as old as time, isn't it? We've seen it in MMA so often. Guys get to the UFC, go so quickly. A couple of fights, things don't go right for them, and that's the end. It's more often, it's very rarely you see guys. There is some guys that went in, went away, come back and done well, but more often than not, the case is guys get there too early, 1 or 2 fights, and then it's over.
I want is my next guys to get in is to surpass what Stevie's done, which was 11 fights. And then if they come out and do what Stevie's doing in PFL and stuff, that's what I want, because it kind of shows progression for us as a gym and a team. And Mark and Dylan are capable of that, and we've got other guys coming up as well, like Keir and like young Sean Clancy and the likes Coonley and stuff who could do that. But a lot of guys don't think long term. They think, oh, we'll take these easy fights now and then we'll see what happens. Whereas I want my guys tested. You can see it even the fights Mark took at amateur, the Teddy Stringer fight, is like, who's number 1 in the UK at the weight at amateur? Yeah, that Swedish guy that came over, who hurt him really bad in the first round, and it ended up a draw. But he's learned so much for that fight. And Dylan's the same. Dylan was 7-0 at amateur. He fought good guys at amateur. He fought Mark Andrews and stuff, and then they threw him to the wolves quite early at pro because they know how good he is. And these wee setbacks are going to push him on. But in terms of, I won't mention any names other than we tried to get a fight for Mark at the end of October there in Austria against Dean Barry, who'd been in the UFC and cut. And they've turned it down straight away. And I'm like, why are you turning down a 3-0 guy? Like, it's maybe the YouTube videos or the Instagram videos I put up of them hitting pads and shit, but he's like 3-0. Like, if you've been in the UFC, you shouldn't be turning down a 3-0 guy.
Mm-hmm. And just when I thought, but obviously Chris as well, you're dealing as a manager as well. You're in that side of the business. So what's the challenges you face there with guys, and the guys that you've got with you trying to match? And I'd like to hear from, obviously James is speaking about the experience and she's heard there. I'd like to hear about yours for that side of the business. Yeah,
I mean, well, James will tell you it's I can't really confirm what the fight is yet, but obviously Mark's got this fight on Budo coming up, and then I get opportunities all the time, and a lot of the guys I offer fights to are guys that I know are ready to fight are going to turn up, and more often than not they're James's. So I mean, we've actually agreed in principle something for Mark later on in the year on a different show, and that's just something that came through the agency that obviously I've been running now for 8 years, I think. And obviously I've had Callum Murray, I've got on Bellator. We had Keir on Bellator until his opponent pulled out. It's just the reliable guys. Now, touching on what James was saying before about when Mark was fighting as an amateur and looking for hard fights and stuff, I always say from a managerial point of view, especially when I got these guys who want to turn pro and they was like, oh, can you help me? First and foremost, my rule is I won't rule out helping anyone. I don't necessarily call it managing, I call it helping. Yeah. My rule is, as long as you're not a dick, I will help you. I don't care whether you're 11-0 or 0-11, because even at 0-11, I'll just try and source an appropriate fight for you. I always say to these guys looking to turn over, it's better for people to say maybe he should turn pro rather than I think he turned pro too soon. So you have a look at guys. So we mentioned Callum Murray being a former featherweight champion on my show, and he won the title against Scotty Pedersen from Wales, who had like 30 amateur fights. Obviously, Marvin Mokiev was like 24-0 or whatever he was. They could have turned pro 10 fights previously, but it was all a process. They obviously came from good gyms and like Mark, James, the same. It wasn't necessarily about sort of getting to 10-0 as an amateur and knocking people out. It was about going through the motion. And I always say, especially at amateur level, if you're a coach and you're not actively looking for somebody who can beat your fighter once they get to a certain level, for me, you're not coaching them right. So if he's 6-0, like James says, and he's got 6 first-round knockouts, yeah, it looks great. But if you're not testing them, they're going to get found out. Doesn't necessarily matter whether you get to the UFC as 10-0 or 10-1. You'll learn more from that loss and look to rebound and get then the next 4 or 5 wins than you will if you just blitzing idiots, basically. But from a management point of view, there are very few fighters, like James said, that guy who was offered Mark, who just basically turned it down. And if you come out of the UFC, you should be willing to fight anyone. There are only, for me, that pool of guys who are just yes is getting smaller, and it's frustrating. But like you say, it's an early sport. The talent, or a young sport, should I say? We're still in the early days, 20 odd years of like real fighting. And the talent is getting better. You've obviously got so many great gyms now, like say Chris in Ireland, who we mentioned previously, James in Scotland, obviously Dean Garnett's doing fantastic things, and is becoming more educational based, so people can do MVQs and stuff in martial arts. So you've got all these guys that are doing the game correctly, and ultimately it will lead to a bigger and better UK MMA and fighters that, like James says, go on, fight 15 times in the UFC and achieve everything they want to achieve.
Yeah, and I think more like you'd be able to speak to this when you get a UFC show coming to, like, obviously London or that. Does that have any impact on the regional shows when there's a big UFC comes into town? Does it have any impact at all for you?
It can do. I think I actually did promote one show on the night where the UFC was actually on in London. This was a good few years ago. And it depends, because obviously the UFC could effectively put a show on every single week in the UK and it would sell out with maybe one name on the card with like no fight announcement. So they could just say, back in the days it was Michael Bisping's going to fight, UFC are doing a show, and they'd just sell out the Manchester Arena, the O2 or wherever, the Hydro or whatever. And I think we've been okay for a lot of years, because it's always been that shows rely a lot on fighters. Unless you've got like a decent name, like we're doing quite well now. We sell quite a few tickets online. Obviously, I'm quite well known in Bolton, without making me sound like an idiot, but I can actually sell 50 tickets overnight on my own show. And obviously I'm not competing or anything like that. So it's a lot of bill money at the end of the day. And we've lived in a world where fighters can fortunately sell a lot of tickets. Big shows don't necessarily feel the effects, because a lot of them just want to go out, have 10 pints, cheer on the mate, not bothered whether it lasts 10 seconds or 10 minutes. And I'll just watch the UFC later on. But now I think we're actually getting, as an MMA society, a bit more educated. I would like to think we are, and we're just getting a lot of actual MMA fans are coming down to Budo anyway, which is a good thing. And they tend to do both. So, in short, no, I don't think it affects us. And long may it continue, to be honest.
It's one of the things. I've got a lot of friends who are not necessarily MMA fans, but I always tell them, or I've took them to local shows, to just go to a local show and just experience the fights firsthand. And I think that for a lot of people, it can turn them into fans. Obviously, if they're not just there getting drunk, but there's nothing like going to an MMA show, I don't think, and just hearing the sounds in the cage, and rather than watching it on TV. It's just even with a big UFC on a TV, Bellator or whatever, it's just, I think there's something about a good regional local show that everybody that enjoys the sport should definitely be going and checking out. And obviously, hopefully, we see good crowds coming for all the regional shows. Now, just finish up just the last couple of things. So obviously we'll get the Grangemouth show approaching fast. So that's November. I might have my dates wrong. November 12th, is it?
Correct.
November 12th. So where are you getting everything ready for that card? Where are you in the process of that and looking at that?
Well, James has announced the 3 fighters that he's got on at the moment. The Mark Dillon they've covered. He's got Martin McCrone fighting Callum Beveridge. We think we've got another 6-7 fights that are going out towards the back end of this week, and they're all almost like, I don't know if Scotland needs more shows, but we get massive influx of fighters. So we've got guys on from Ursha, Hit Squad, Submission Factory, Urban Guerrillas, obviously with Barry, it being Barry's show. We'll probably end up with 15-16 fights quite comfortably. Everything's good. It always sells out. The atmosphere is great. Just looking forward to it. Really a good one, and not to mention that we've done the double header this time, so we've actually got a show in Wales the same night.
Plotting for punishment.
I know. Well, I tossed a coin as well with regards to where we're going to end up, and I'm north of the border rather than south of the border. So I
think James would probably agree with you on this one. We absolutely need more shows up here.
I would. There's been a severe lack of them, and some of the ones that have kind of cropped up have obviously been no very good standard. But the Budo one's always consistent. That one and the on top one are always consistent, man. It would be good if there's more than 2 a year. We've been, after COVID, even we were at a couple of those fight shows during COVID, the illegal ones. But it feels like we're constantly just up and down that M6 now. Do you know what I mean? It's like we've got Lorenzo on that Cage Warriors Academy this weekend, and it's like just fucking. We're impressed. And the week before, it's just a nightmare, man. So Grangemouth is like 10-minute drive for the gym. It's 25 minutes from my house. They're the type of shows we need. So hopefully it's 2 a year's cool, but 4 a year would be pretty good.
I'd do 4 a year, James, but it might not be me that's not doing it. So just
James, you just need to, I've told you just need to fill up that private jet you've got. I'll get you. Don't need to worry about the M6. Just M6. You'll be good.
Be cheaper.
Well, we'll wrap up on that. Listen, Chris, thanks very much for coming on. It was good to chat to you. It's always good to hear a different voice in the show as well. So we appreciate the time, mate.
Appreciate being on. Thank you.